We are here today to talk about improving digital well-being, Google's approach and tips for developers. My name is Mindy Brooks, and I'm a UX lead here at Google. I focus on kids and family, as well as the UX lead for Google Play. With me today are three of my colleagues, Safia, Maggie, and Rose, all focusing on digital well-being, and we're here to share our insights and tips for you today. So let's dive right in. Today's conversation will be focused on three major areas, first of which is insights into digital well-being, what we've learned from talking to users around the world about digital well-being and their thoughts and opinions there, our products and features that we've launched, as well as our ongoing commitment in this space, and the third is our tips for developers, some takeaways for you today. So, how do people feel about their digital well-being? As a UX lead here at Google, I can say that we are committed to talking to our users around the world to understand what they're thinking and feeling. In fact, this past year alone, we spoke to 95,000 people to understand what does digital well-being mean for you. And what we learned is it's highly nuanced and highly personal. What it means for me might not mean what it means for you. But there is one thing people can agree on, that kids' digital well-being remains a top concern. And we hear that globally. While parents and adults see the many benefits of technology for kids, education, connection, security, they also have a lot of concerns. In fact, 84% of parents globally report that kids' tech usage remains a top parenting concern. Concerns around inappropriate content, online safety, bullying, and even social skill development are themes we hear around the globe. And much of that concern is because kids are getting devices earlier than ever before. How many of you have ever seen a young child with a device? How many of you have noticed that kid might be better at using that device than yourself? That's for me, for sure. It's quite amazing to watch. So parents are really starting to wrestle with how do we help kids develop healthy tech habits and balance as they grow. So one stat that's very interesting is that we know kids in the US are getting their first smartphone at the age of 8. And it's just starting earlier and earlier. So how do parents help develop healthy boundaries and balance for children? But as you can imagine, kids don't live in isolation, and in fact, are learning about how to use technology from observing families and parents dynamic with tech and the rules in the household. And so this heavily influences how kids develop and grow. So this year, we really set out to understand what does digital well-being mean in the family context. And if we understand the family context, can it help us inform how we create more products for people? So we did research in 11 countries with 16,000 parents, teens, and kids. And what we learned across the globe is that families live in a state of paradox with digital well-being and technology. On one hand, it brings families together. On the other hand, it drives them apart. And we often hear a phenomenon called alone together. You're all in the same room, on same devices, but we're not talking or connecting with each other. On one hand, it relaxes and de-stresses after a very long day of work or school, and on the other hand, it causes stress. On one hand, it promotes child development through education and information, and on the other hand, it can potentially hinder child development. On one hand, parents think kids overuse tech, and on the other hand, parents can't manage it themselves. Parents will promote usage for education and learning, and on the other hand, they're discouraging usage. Go outside is things we commonly hear. So families are living in the state of paradox and tension on a daily basis. So these themes emerged from the research of family connection, of stress, of child well-being, of overuse, and of balance. And so taking these 5 things into consideration, we really wanted to think about what we could build for our users to help with address these needs. But I want to point out one thing. It's not just adults or parents that we've heard from. We hear a lot from kids and teenagers too. And they frequently point out that adults aren't the best at modeling balance and well-being for them. We hear stories of texting at the dinner table while the kid has to have their phone put away, or texting while driving, or being distracted and the kid having to repeat their questions over and over. And for kids and teenagers particularly, they say it's hypocritical. So this is something that we take very seriously. How do we help all of our users start to understand and have what their digital well-being means for them? So with that, I will pass it to Safia to tell you a little bit more about what we've learned here.
Thanks, Mindy. Hi, I'm Safia. I'm a UX researcher on Android. When we talk to adults about their smartphones in particular, they tell us that notifications can distract them and even cause stress. We talk to people about notifications and how they manage their attention, and they tell us they're afraid to miss important notifications. And they're so inundated with notifications, but only some are actually important. In one of our studies, a research participant said, "Notifications make us attached to our phones. It's horrible." But notifications are just one element of digital well-being on smartphones. Across studies, we started to hear a growing resentment towards phones. For example, someone said, "It's almost inhumane to always have a phone in my hands." And someone else said, "I look at this thing more than anything else in my day, even more than my girlfriend." Then we were in Japan doing some research, and we talked to feature phone users. So they were actively avoiding using a smartphone, and they were happy. A feature phone user said, "Other people on smartphones are on social networks, and they feel the need to be connected all the time. I don't want to live like that. I have a clear rhythm in life. I have self-control. I have time for other things." And they really inspired us to think about JOMO, or the joy of missing out. And the joy comes from feeling like you're in control and you're not really missing out on anything at all. So we decided to dig deeper into the experience of connection and disconnection. We went out and talked to people about their smartphones. And they repeatedly tell us just how useful and essential their phones are. People rely on their phones for communication, navigation. Phones can be our alarm clock, our camera, even the way that we pay for things. And this alone may seem obvious, but it's actually the implications of this that are important to think about. If someone does want to disconnect from the phone, it's very difficult to do so because they still need these things. So if phones are so useful and essential, where does the resentment come from? Well, we learned that it's unintentional behaviors that bring about these feelings of guilt. So what does that mean? It might be intentionally using your phone for something and then getting distracted and then using it for something else. For example, someone said, "I check my phone to see the time and then get sucked right in." Or it could be spending longer than you intended on the device. Someone else said, "I spent an hour and a half on a social media app. I was appalled with myself." And people tell us about how they've noticed their own behaviors on their phone evolve over time. For example, we've heard about feeling phantom cues, like feeling like the phone is buzzing when it's not. Or they notice that they might repeatedly refresh an app, just hoping for new content to appear. And people say that they're afraid to be away from their phone in case somebody needs to reach them, or they get a message and they need to reply quickly. So it can be very difficult to put the phone down, to disconnect from it. As people are more and more connected, there's this desire to disconnect, or to at least use the phone in a more intentional way. So, what has Google done to support people's intentional relationship with their technology? Last year, we stood on this stage and announced our commitment to digital well-being, which is really rooted in our belief that technology should improve lives and not distract from them. We launched tools to give people greater control over how they use their devices and technology. One of those tools is Family Link. So for parents, You can monitor and keep an eye on screen time, setting daily limits and bedtimes. You can manage the content that your child sees, remotely approving downloads and blocking apps. And you can keep an eye on location, remotely lock the device, and for all those times that your child loses their phone in the couch cushions, you can ring the device. YouTube launched Take a Break, so if you want to be reminded to take breaks while watching videos, YouTube will send you a reminder. Gmail launched Snooze, so if you want to put emails off for a later time, you can do that. And they launched high priority notifications, so you only get notified when there's an important email in your inbox. And we've seen that high priority notifications have eliminated 97% of notifications on average, while still keeping users up to date when they get an important email from the people that matter most. On Android, we launched digital well-being tools, including the dashboard, which shows you how you're using your device, app timers, which let you put limits on apps, and wind down to help you disconnect from the device at night. And in one study, we've seen that app timers helped users stick to their goal 96% of the time. And wind down reduced nightly use by 27%. So we're starting to see the impact of our features, but we know that there's more to do. I'm going to pass it over to Maggie.
Awesome. Thank you. In my role, I look across Google's digital well-being initiatives to align our strategy and ensure that we have a point of view that shares our users' point of view. And what we heard this year is that many people have digital well-being on their minds, and it's become even more important for people and their families around the world. As you heard from both Mindy and Safia, we know that helping parents is critical to this initiative. So with our launches of Family Link for mobile, as well as on Chrome OS devices, we've brought this support to our global users. And in the past 12 months, we've seen 1 in 3 people actively take steps to make a change with their relationship with tech. And the interesting thing is that these people have taken steps that I have certainly taken myself, things like deleting apps I'm not actively using, or reducing the number of notifications. And finally, sometimes leaving that phone in a different room in order to not be interrupted. And the good news is that 80% of them have reported a positive impact to their overall well-being. This is really, really hopeful news. But we know that we can do even more together, which is exactly why we're here with you, our developer community. You can help us really scale this together. Another resource that we've leveraged is drawing upon the expertise of others. So we've assembled a bunch of experts in various fields, ranging from neuroscience to behavioral science to psychology and parenting, and we're employing their best practices in a lot of our work. For me, as a user experience practitioner, I love to think about the user. It's a great way to ground us in empathy. And so with the many, in fact, 95,000 people we listened to this year, I thought I would share with you a little bit about how they're feeling about this topic in their own words.
Oof. I feel like I should be controlling it.
My biggest issue with it is knowing when to stop.
It just tends to capture me away from what I should be focusing on.
I think you have to say that you control the phone, it doesn't control you.
Technology is not so much it's a necessary evil, it's a necessary good that could go either way. You know, the jury's out. It's up to us as to what we do with the technology.
So you heard from our wise users. The jury is up to us to really determine what's next. And with that, we're going to introduce some of our awesome features which built in a lot of the insights we learned from our users through these many studies. And with that, I'll hand it over to Rose to share some of these updates.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Rose, Product Manager for Digital Wellbeing. And as we've heard from Safia and Mindy and Maggie, we have been making a lot of progress. We're encouraged to see the data which shows our users are really changing their behaviors and meeting their goals. But also our research tells us there's more work to do. So we're excited to announce some new features which continue to build on what we announced last year. First, as we heard, notifications can be a source of stress. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that my phone will tell me that's really useful, but not all of it is useful right now. For example, this morning I was working out, and before anyone thinks I'm a hero, I'm on London time, so I'm basically in the afternoon right now. And I'm sitting in a plank, and I'm watching the timer, hoping that timer is going to go down quickly, and I get the notification that says, hey, the daily crossword's ready. And I love my crosswords, but right then, I didn't need that. So in Android Q, what we're introducing is priority notifications. And what this does is creates two types of notifications. There's priority and there's gentle. And only the priority notifications will make noise or vibrate and interrupt you. So in my example, that crossword notification, that can be gentle and something I come back to later as opposed to interrupting me right now in the moment. And we've learned from the research that it's the unintentional moments that can lead to feelings of regret and guilt. So there are important moments in your day when your phone should reflect the intention of what you're trying to do. With wind down, we do that at night, so that when the user's trying to sleep, wind down serves as a reminder that that's what you're trying to do. But imagine I'm at work or at school, and I want to be productive. There's a lot of stuff on my phone that can help me be productive. If I'm at work, I'm getting emails, I'm looking up where my next meeting is, I'm getting pings, there's a multitude of things. But there's some stuff that would be better to wait until I'm ready to when I don't need to focus. So we're introducing focus mode, which will let you pause distracting apps with a single tap to get work done. When the app is paused, the notifications are paused, and you can't open the app. So for example, when preparing for this speech or trying to do work at work, you can turn on focus mode to pause the apps that actually you don't need at that moment. And we've seen that our app timers are effective for helping users be more mindful of the apps they maybe want to use at different times. But we've heard a lot of feedback from people all around the world that it's not just apps that distract them, it's also websites. So for example, one that I can personally relate to, that feeling of, oh, I'll just go maybe do some online shopping or scroll these news sites. And so what we're doing in Android Q is we're introducing the ability for you to see your data from Chrome and also to set timers on not just apps, but also websites. But changing habits is hard. I always remind myself of this when it feels like work is hard. And what we've heard from users is that they want more positive encouragement and motivation to stick to their goals. So you'll start to see more of this, starting first with the ability to set a screen time goal with helpful nudges to stay on track. And as Maggie mentioned, we're doing this partnering with many experts to understand more how do we think about user behavior. And in addition to these new features, we're also making a number of improvements to existing features to make sure that they continue to be effective and help users achieve what they want to achieve. So, for example, we're making it easier to see how you're doing with your app timers, and we're introducing a daily schedule for wind down. Because as much as we might hear from the experts that it's really important you go to sleep at the exact same time every night, we know that that doesn't always fit in your life. And we know from our research, and we heard from Mindy, that parents are concerned about the amount of time that their kids are spending on technology, and they're actively looking for support. So we're adding more features to Family Link to help parents set the digital ground rules and find the right balance of technology for their kids. As one example, we're introducing app-specific time limits so that parents can say, instead of just, I don't want you used to your phone, but I have this limit for a specific app, which, great if you use it this amount, but beyond that, we'll shut it down for the rest of the day. And we're also introducing the ability for parents to grant kids more screen time. So imagine your kid reaches their screen time limit for the day, but has a little more homework to do or something else. Parents can grant bonus time to the kids, and we'll also introduce the ability for a kid to request bonus time, which a parent can say yes or no to. But it's not just parents who have the ability to help others disconnect. We all have the ability to help each other disconnect. And so Gmail just recently launched the ability to schedule send emails as part of their 15th anniversary. So as an example, Monday was a public holiday in the UK where I'm based, but it wasn't here, so I was working here. But my team doesn't need to be interrupted with the emails that I was sending. So I can schedule send to say I want it to arrive on Tuesday when they're back in the office and not interrupt them on the Monday. And all of this is helping us build more of an intentional way for users to interact with technology so they can meet more of their digital well-being goals. With that, I'll pass back to Maggie.
Awesome. Thank you, Rose. All right, so bringing it home with this notion of embracing digital well-being for a sustained relationship with users, which I'm sure you all are thinking a lot about as well. And I personally want to provide you with some tools, some resources. This is early days in this space, and we'll continue to kind of build upon what we share today. But what we know is that having a meaningful impact really requires getting these tools out to more people, and you're a huge, huge part of that. So I want to share with you resources for you, resources for parents and educators, and resources for you as developers. But first, we have to start with ourselves, kind of that heal thyself first mantra that I think many of us don't spend enough time on. And our friends in our Google brand studio and marketing team relaunched our wellbeing.google site. We know that this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's very nuanced. And so they've created a great tool, a self-reflection tool, a guide for parents and kids about tech use, and video content with some of those experts who we've sought out. So I hope you'll find this valuable, and I hope you'll check it out. The other thing that we have available is a great resource called Be Internet Awesome for Kids. How many of you have actually checked this out? Show of hands. All right, there's lots of homework. I think you guys would love it. 3 great assets within here: curriculum for teachers, Interland video game for kids, and a helpful guide for parents to have those conversations and get kids safe online at an early age. And the good news, this is available in 16 countries. And finally, resources for you. You are a huge, huge part of us making this change as a collective effort. And so I wanted to start with our digital well-being values. We hold these dear and we build these into our products. First, provide awareness. We want to ensure that we're encouraging mindful, intentional use. We want to then enable control and personal ownership so that people really understand the decisions they're making with their technology. We want to then deliver benefits without guilt, shame, or regret. We learn a lot of this through the sentiment analysis and surveys we run, and maybe that's an insight for you to think about as well. And then we want to ensure trust. Ultimately, we're all here to build that trust with users, and this can be a critical resource for that. Transitioning into a case study, the thing that I have found so interesting about working on digital well-being as a longtime user experience practitioner is that oftentimes what we find is that what's good for the user is good for the well-being, and that makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting about Drops, this is a language learning app. They use a technique called spaced repetition, and they have an intentional amount of time where they give a lapse between the last learning session and the subsequent session. And what's interesting is these stats could look possibly counterintuitive to somebody who's looking at it from a growth kind of perspective. The average daily user spends 56% less time within the app and uses it 51% less often. And so from a digital well-being standpoint, this sounds like a really good thing, but the amazing thing is that this model really lines up the user goals with the business goals to really make their app strategy work. So I'll share with you first the user goals, and then I'll share with you the business goals, and hopefully this will convey a little bit more about how they approached it. So from a user goals perspective, they want to lower the barrier to entry. So they've introduced a 5-minute session limit. They figure anybody who's looking forward to learning a language can certainly spend at least 5 5 minutes on that session. They then want to make sure they've got a sustainable engagement model, so they have a limit on the next session, which is 10 hours. What's cool about that is that spaced repetition, which really allows for memorization. So a great way to align those user goals with their app strategy. Then, when we take a look at the business strategy, they have users who pay more, subscribe more, and churn less, which is a pretty amazing feat in and of itself. So their stats are also very impressive. They see a 4x higher average revenue per daily user versus their peer average. They see a 2.5 higher install rate to paid subscriber conversion versus peer average. And then finally, 84% lower subscriber churn. So this is an amazing evidence of how you can align user goals, business goals, and really have a solvent business model. And the good news is I'm seeing more and more of this in the ecosystem. I was meeting with top app developers yesterday in a developer event we had. I'm sure many of you are also thinking along these lines, and I think this is what has been so heartening to me about this work, is lining up the user goals that ultimately lead to the business goals. I also want to share with you best practices. This team, this collective team, which I represent right now, but there are many, many across the company working on this, have observed 2 critical signals for digital well-being. They're quality and quantity. So let me tell you a little bit more about quality. So what this might look like as you're thinking about your app, or maybe even reflecting on what we just shared with Drops, this is all about helping them complete tasks without completing any extra steps. It's also about enjoying their time and energy spent on the site. And then finally, one thing that we've really looked into is collecting signals of quality so that we understand how they spent their time. And what's interesting about this is oftentimes the people in their life, the people who matter, is a really critical signal. And that's much of what Rose was also intimating with some of the prioritization in Gmail, et cetera. When we look at quantity, we want to make sure we're encouraging that intentional use. So this means prioritizing the things that help you with your overall well-being. That includes sleep, work, relationships, all those things that help your physical and emotional self also be well. We then want to recommend that if you're building enterprise tools, you provide some way for the user to maybe separate that personal life and that work life. And I think for many of us, it's become very intermingled, but it's a time where it might benefit us to really look at ways to break that apart at times. And then finally, consider the user needs and support those needs. This sounds like a no-brainer, and ultimately this comes back to really that user experience principle of focusing on the user, which we do a lot at Google, but you might uncover some really unmet needs and discover some new ways of going about your work. Finally, again, representing the amazing research our team has done across Google this year, I wanted to synthesize just 3 methods that we have found incredibly useful with digital well-being research. 1, interview the 90th percentile user. You can really get a sense of where the unmet needs lie when you're getting to know who's not using your product. 2nd, consult experts, critics, and brand trust data. Having a more objective perspective really helps you see your blind spots. And then finally, survey your users and then check logs. What we've seen is that through surveys, qualitative feedback and surveys, that doesn't always line up with the actions people are taking on the website or on the app. So correlating those 2 will really uncover what is happening with their user behavior. Do they say they want to change something and yet they're not actively doing that? And finding ways to make those bridge is really important. Finally, I want to thank you first and foremost for coming out very early this morning to be with us. I really appreciate that you've come to Google to spend this time together with this amazing community. And I hope that you'll get outside once it gets sunny and take some time to just enjoy this amazing week and experience JOMO, as we like to call it. And when you get back to your desks, we look forward to working with you on building an ecosystem that supports and prioritizes digital well-being. Thank you.